wherever door I've walked through, I've always had like imposter syndrome. When you look at the Bible, you find God always uses people with imposter syndrome. My dad struggled with depression, but he had a sense of purpose. And my mum was really insecure, but she just had this confidence. And I had loads of questions about faith, life, meaning, purpose. And they were just like, look, we live the way we do because of Jesus. And I said, well, I want to know.
What was day one like as being this believer in Christ?
If you spend a big chunk of your life messing up your life, sometimes it does take a bit of time to see that healing. And I was heading back to the UK with the thought, if I could just help one teenager and count on God's grace, that's what I want to give my life to.
Did you know the calling that God was leading towards you?
My heart breaks for teenagers. I did everything that I thought you should do in the youth ministry playbook, and actually a lot of it doesn't work. Young people are just like, hey, I'm getting bullied at school. What does Jesus say about this? Or I'm really struggling with my anxiety.
If you were to put the church on a mind map, what are some of the things that we can improve on?
If you're a church and you think you're better than that church on the corner, that is collective grandeur narcissism. You know, the local church, whether it's got 20 people or 200 people or 2,000 people, is the local church.
Balancing ministry with family.
Balance is the luxury of the comfortable. But if you're going to take risks, then sometimes you might not always have the balance that you want.
You've been on the contrast of big ministries, medium ministries, and even NGOs. Is there a big paradox of shift in terms of how you navigate?
In terms of like the way I like to lead is always through relationship. But the problem is with that leadership style is that as soon as you stop leading those people and now you're leading these people, that doesn't transfer. You're back to square one.
Dan, welcome to Faith Off the Record, someone who I've known for a long time, through mutual friends. It's a pleasure to have you on and really excited to have you as part of the show. Welcome
Thank you,
to the show.
Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. So let's just get into it. And I really want to just understand more about who Dan Blythe is, you know, what your journey's been like since the beginning, how you've come to the faith. Take us back and just tell us, what is Dan Blythe's life about and how did you come to the faith, firstly?
Yeah. Well, when I was about 10 years old, my mum and dad got divorced. My mum sort of had a Catholic upbringing, so like we went to church sort of like Christmas and Easter. My dad was like strict atheist, and then they got divorced, and then they naturally just both went to church. I don't know, someone invited them, and for whatever reason they did, and they both became like just born again Christians. And like when I mean like born again Christians, like all in, don't talk about anything other than Jesus. Oh. So I think at that age, like age 10, I was like, I could see God was real because their lives were different. You know, they were kind of, my dad struggled with depression, but he was just like, had a sense of purpose. And my mum was like really insecure, but she just had this confidence. So I think that at that age, I was aware God was real. But my teenage years, I didn't really have any Christian mates, and all my mates were just like living for the weekend, living for the moment. And I don't know, I just followed the crowd. I definitely was not a leader in my teenage years. And my teenage years were like messy, confused, struggling. And then I just like, my parents wanted me to be a Christian, but I couldn't behave like to their Christian standards. So at age 18, went backpacking to Australia. There, my first week, I met some Christians, like so random. Like obviously, like God was in it, but it's such a coincidence. And then they invited me like boxing, surfing, watched the Rugby World Cup into a small group, and I had loads of questions about faith, life, meaning, purpose. And they were just like, "Look, we live the way we do because of Jesus." And I said, "Well, I want to know that Jesus. I want to encounter that That's Jesus." And so, age 18, I did gave my life to Christ.
Awesome. So, for someone that may be watching this show who is not a Christian and is dabbling with the question of faith, how important is small groups? How important was that for someone like yourself in terms of getting involved, not being too religious about it? Can you just talk to us sort of how were the things that were going on in your mind as getting this exposure to Christianity and the faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, like when you're kind of exploring Christianity, that you both have an experience of rows and circles. And what I mean by that is in a church service, you're in a row. And so you can hear worship and prayer and the word getting taught, which is great. But then circles is more for like discussion and like asking questions about what you're experiencing. And Jesus did both of those. Like he would speak to the multitudes who were in rows, and then he'd spend a lot of his time with his disciples, helping them with their questions. Yeah. And so I think, if you're curious, look for both of those spaces, because I think, no matter how long you are sort of searching, or even if you become a Christian, there's still more questions. I have way more questions than I did right at the beginning. And so having those spaces to kind of like really explore those is important.
That's so good. So talk to me then, what was journey like? What was day one like as being this believer in Christ and faith? And what was Australia like in that time? Can you just talk about that?
Yeah. I think for me, what I saw when I encountered those kind of Christians is that they lived just with like joy, and it wasn't like kind of religion with a load of rules, and they weren't like trying to behave in a certain way to be part of something. They had this freedom, and I think that's what was attractive to me. So I gave my life to Christ, but it's not like I experienced all this freedom overnight. Like if you spend a big chunk of your life messing up your life, sometimes it does take a bit of time to see that healing. And so what happened was I was just in this community, within this kind of safe space, and just from month to month, year to year, those kind of like unhealthy patterns and rhythms just seemed to like drop off me. And so I was there age 18 and I left age 21 after doing 2 years Bible college. And I was like just a completely different person. And I was heading back to the UK with the thought, if I could just help one teenager and count on God's grace, that's what I want to give my life to.
That's awesome. Did you know the calling that God was maybe leading towards you, or did you get a sense of purpose and direction during those times?
Yeah. I mean, I maybe didn't have language to put around it than I do now, as I do now, but I think I definitely had a sense of, I just want to help teenagers. Like my heart breaks for teenagers. And like when I was growing up, when I think about it, both my mum's church and my dad's church did have youth groups, and they were amazing. Like really good people, you know, they'd like sit with you, grab a milkshake when you failed your exams. And I'm very grateful for them. But I was thinking like, what was it? Like, why did I connect more when I was in Australia than I did when I was in those youth groups? I think what it was, as good as those youth group was, there was like about 5 young people, and none of those were like kind of like lads that I could do life with. Like we're just all very different. And, you know, most of them were kind of girls and into different things. And I just needed a couple of lads who I could like, I don't know, play football with, or I don't know, do some exercise with, you know what I mean? Just like-minded. And I think when I went to Australia, I just met some like-minded people, and we had other things in common other than Jesus. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about a bigger church. Now, I love the mini church and the mega church. I think I love them all, but it was a mega church where I actually got saved. And the reason why it helped me is that when I walked into there was like lack of accountability. Like I was just lost in the crowd, and I love that because I felt so messed up. I like the fact that I was hidden. But then when I went in there, there's so many different people, is that you can find people who are kind of into some of the things that you're into, which means you can hang out together, like surfing, football, and all that kind of stuff. So that was nice, actually having mates that, you know, we all love Jesus, but actually we enjoyed hanging out together. That was a game changer for me.
That's great. And obviously we know the mega church, we know the small churches come in all sort of sizes and shapes. During that time then, sort of going through the Bible college, getting into the knowledge of the Lord and Jesus, how was life for you outside of that? Was it fully dedicated to finding purpose, or what was Dan up to those days of transition period, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, I was like working really hard because I was working part-time to like fund myself through Bible college. Although having said that, my stepdad did actually pay for most of it, so I'm very grateful for him. But yeah, I mean, I think I had to like really hustle to survive, to pay all my bills when I was there. Like I was the other side of the world, like age 18, living life by myself. And then it was trying to like understand the Bible, but Bible college is like, you know, just going straight in the deep end. So we're talking about like just like hermeneutics and like, you know, textual criticism and like, you know, Josephus and all this stuff, which was probably not where I was at that point. Like I was just really, you know, if there was like a year of doing like the Alpha course, where, you know, just spend a year unpacking that probably was more where I was at. Having said that, being in the deep end, you know, you either sink or you learn to swim. And so I was just paddling fast, trying to like really understand this like different levels of doctrine and theology. And as I kind of pressed in, like I think God just kind of met me there. And if it wasn't for that deep dive in my first year of Bible college, like I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So I think all that just to say, you know, even in the times when a lot of stuff was going over my head, God just somehow just seemed to help me connect with some stuff, which really enabled my like level of discipleship. So Bible college for me was like a detox from all the rubbish that I'd experienced, but it was also like a beautiful place of like learning and unlearning.
How do you feel the experience with Bible college in today's society with someone who maybe wanted to go Bible college in that transition period of can't decide whether it's for me or not? Yeah. You know, what's your advice for someone in that position?
Yeah. I mean, when I chat to people who have done Bible college, or they've taken a gap year and they've done missions, or they've gone and done some internship with the church ministry, most times everybody I speak to, like, there's no regret. If it's a year where you're just like, I'm giving this year to God, like, I just want to spend more time in his presence, more time in his word. Like, I don't chat to many people and they're like, yeah, it was a waste of time. You know, everyone's like, I'm more like Jesus now, or I've got more sense of purpose and hope. And so for me, like, I'm a massive advocate of any moment in your life when you can spend extra time with God, like it's only going to benefit your life, really.
Yeah. No, so good, so good. So you come then from graduating Bible college, you're now transitioning into London, right?
Yeah.
Describe and sort of talk about how that transition, how did that come about? Was it, again, from the Lord's perspective, was it an inclination? And then, again, what did you do on day one when you come over here into this big smoke, as we call it, and getting settled? What was just going through your mind? Just talk us about that.
Yeah, it was kind of like, when you have a kid, you do like all the pre-courses about what to prepare you, like how to change a nappy and what to do. Then you have a kid and like everything you learn just sort of like goes out the window. You kind of forget it, or it doesn't really apply, and you're trying. And Bible college is a bit like that. Like it helps you with your relationship with God. And I was specializing in youth ministry, but I think everything I learned just kind of like went out the window when I actually got into the front line of youth ministry, because none of the young people were asking me about textual criticism or hermeneutics or what about the Mosaic law and stuff. They were just like, hey, like I'm getting bullied at school, what does Jesus say about this? Or I'm really struggling with my anxiety, can you pray for me? And so for me, being on the front line of youth ministry was really refreshing, and it was really exciting, because I felt like even though Bible college doesn't really kind of prepare you for the nuances of youth ministry, the kind of the deep well that it does prepare you with helps you when you're actually with them. And so, I got straight into youth ministry, and I did everything that I thought you should do in the youth ministry playbook. And you actually try it, and actually a lot of it doesn't work, because young people are unique.
Yeah.
And I know we look at them with all these patterns, and they're this and they're that, and this generation's got so many labels on them, but actually it's made up of a lot of unique individuals. And so just always, I think when I chat to any youth leader and they're saying they're starting a youth ministry, and they say, what should I do? I'm just like, just go to Pizza Hut, go to Nando's, just sit with them, just listen, just see what their needs are, see what breaks their heart, invite them into be part of speaking into the future of the youth ministry, what do they want to cover? And if you are a leader that always listens, then I think you're always going to be a good leader.
Fantastic. So talk to me through, which is for someone who's going to that position of want to go into the ministry, done the Bible college. So what was it like for you? Was it a case of, I have this clear blueprint from the Lord, or was it a case of I'm just going to go by faith, coming to the UK, or was it a case of did you get plugged in terms of with the ministry here? How did that journey unfold?
Yeah.
And what's the guidance in terms of crystallizing this is from the Lord for me to do this?
Yeah, right. Yeah. It was all just walking by faith,
right.
And different doors kind of opened at different times. And for doors to open, you do still need to knock on doors. You can't just wait at home going, God, open a door and then do nothing. So I was having conversations with people. I was looking at jobs online. I was chatting to different ministry leaders, getting advice. And so I've always been quite proactive.
Right.
And then, when a door opened, just simply kind of walked into that. But, if I'm being honest with you, that there's always, wherever door I've walked through, I've always had imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is where you're at the table and you feel you don't have the skills and abilities to do what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah.
And so even working for Alpha, I've been with Alpha nearly 5 years now. And I think, I joined Alpha, and you're working with Nicky Gumbel, who's one of the most intellectual, smartest minds I know when it comes to unpacking the Bible. Very just humble, genuine leader. And I'm sitting at the table with him and other people, and imposter syndrome sets in. I haven't got that level of intelligence. But then when you look at the Bible, what you find is that God always uses people with imposter syndrome, whether it's Moses doubting his communication skills, or Joshua, and that's why God's saying, be strong and courageous, or Paul or Timothy, they've all got imposter syndrome. And I think God chooses people with imposter syndrome because when they actually do it or do something, God gets the glory, God gets the credit. It's not their skill, it's not their ability, it's not their talent. And all the way through my different doors that I've walked through, I've had imposter syndrome, but it's always been God. And so even when someone says, oh, Dan, well done, that's great, there's nothing in me which goes, yeah, it's all me, that's mate. Me. It was me. Yeah. It's all of it's by the grace of God. And so now I'm in a place where I'm turning 40 next month. And I'm actually thinking, whatever I do next for my next 10 years, 20 years, I want to have imposter syndrome. I want to be in a place where I'm really doubting my own skill and ability to do this, so that by God's power is by him. So just leave that margin for the miraculous.
Wow. That's so amazing. Imposter syndrome really equates to really putting your faith in action, and stepping out and believing and trusting God to kind of open those doors, etc., which is so good. And I think we live in a day and age where that exists, but we're not executing that, but believing by faith, which I think that's where we kind of land towards. So from your perspective, I know when you're sort of going through doors, talking to a lot of people now, you're sort of in this journey. I'm sure it happens, but you get sometimes the no and sometimes the setbacks. Has there been a time and circumstance from your perspective, Dan, where you've had those no's and it's challenged the faith or it's rocked the faith a bit? Can you give an example of that?
I mean, when we think of like no's, so I was leading youth ministry in a church and I was leading it with my wife, and it was probably one of the most exciting times of like just being youth leaders. And we did it for like 8 years. It was like youth and young adults and stuff. And there was gatherings and discipleship. Like I loved it. And I think we were happy to do that for the rest of our whole life. Be the guy with the Zimmer frame at the back going, go on, like nothing in me to be on the platform, but just raising up young leaders. And then my pastor at the time asked me if I would step out of youth, hand it over to like my number 2, who was a phenomenal leader. And I had full confidence that, he would be able to take it on. So I was like, in my head, I was like, yeah, sure. And then my job was to be creative pastor. So to take on like social media, online services, videos and stuff like that. Now, in my head, I've gone to Bible college and I want to help teenagers.
Yeah.
In my head, everything that like makes me come alive is to really like help young people like encounter God's grace. And then my pastors asked me to step out of youth ministry and step into this other thing, which I thought, was not in line with what God had called me to do. So in terms of your question, like, is there things that I've had to say no to? Like he asked me, do you want to do this? But really at that moment, it was like, I would like you to do this. And so I remember praying about it. And and God just said, like, don't cling on to the youth ministry tightly, like it's not yours. Like, cling to Jesus tightly and everything else loosely. And what I realized is that I had actually started to build my identity in my role. Like I was Dan Blythe, youth pastor, and I loved it. I loved being a youth pastor, and I love that. And then the moment it was taken away, it was good because I had to work out who Dan Blythe was, just as a child of God, and actually work out my identity. And then, so I did this creative role for like 2 years. And then after doing 10 years with this church, I handed in my notice because I felt it was time to go back into youth ministry, get a call from my now boss at Alpha. She says, hey, I hear you're looking to get involved in youth ministry. I said, yeah. She said, have you got youth ministry experience? I said, yeah. She says, have you got creative experience? I said, yeah, I have. And she's like, because I can, black magic cameras and reds because I've done this creative thing. So all that to say, if I hadn't have done those 2 years in the creative world, I wouldn't have got the job that I'm doing now, which I thank God for every single day. Yeah. And so sometimes even in those seasons of life when you're like, God, why am I doing this? This doesn't make sense. This is not the big dream that you put in my heart. Like God uses everything and prepares you for, some of those things that he has. So yeah, just to encourage anyone who's listening right now and you're like, you got a heart for this or a dream for this, but right now it just doesn't look like that. Good. Yeah, God will use that.
So good. So you've been on the contrast of big ministries, medium ministries, and even NGOs, and you've done a lot of work in the youth, absolutely. What are some of the learnings and the takeaways that you've sort of found over the time with working in these ministries? Is there a big paradox of shift in terms of how you navigate? Does Dan Blythe adjust, or is Dan Blythe across every blanket, across ministries or anything that he gets involved with? What's the contrast between the ministries and the opportunities you've had to date?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, and everyone's got their own leadership style, and I always want to make sure I'm never one of those leaders which is like pointing the finger and judging other people, because the beautiful thing about having different leadership styles is that you can lead in different ways and lead different things. But in terms of like my leadership style and the way I like to lead is always through relationship. So if I'm gonna actually go the distance with someone, like I want to know you, and that means I know when your birthday is, I know what you're going through. Like if there's someone that I'm leading and they've lost a baby and they haven't told me, that's on me. Like I want to be close in the world. If they're getting married, like I hope they're texting me rather than I'm finding out on social media. So I think relationship is key, that we're actually doing life together. Because that builds trust, that builds, just this level of like strength, so that you can actually lead. So I think, I'm always looking to build relationship. But the problem is with that leadership style is that as soon as you stop leading those people and now you're leading these people, that doesn't transfer. You're not like the same leader. You're back to square one because you're building relationally. And so I'm saying it because I think it's a good thing. But sometimes we think, oh yeah, this person, he's such a gun leader. We look at him, he's led that. But if you transfer over there, it doesn't mean that you operate at that level anymore. You're right back here. learning to build relationships and listening and loving the people around you. And so I think for me, my leadership style is always the same wherever I go. Just it comes out friendship, relationship, listening, learning, and then we go at the pace of the health of the people. I love that quote, if the vision is not intimidating to you, it's insulting to God. And what it means is that we should all have a vision which is really, really scary, really, really big, because God wants us to have big vision. And I get that God wants us to have big vision. But if the vision is like so big that it's like going to destroy a team, it's going to demoralize a community, then I think that's also massively insulting to God. So for me, I love vision, but I also don't love vision, which is going to like cost the whole congregation and community, their joy, So I think if you want to make sure you don't lead in a way that's going to hurt them, you need relationship. And so that's why I say relationship's key.
So good. So just coming back on that relationships part, and it's a unique skill set, but also it's a gifting to manage relationships. And being one involved with youth a lot. And can you just tell me in terms of like through your experience in ministry, what have been some of the key nuggets and tips and tricks that you've kind of learned to adapt and really helped you with your faith, with navigating life? Has there been some golden tips that you can share in terms of how you've, been down Blythe on the way on this journey and really maintained integrity as well as the faith and managing relationships, but any key nuggets in ministry? Yeah,
for sure. I think always be a beginner, never be a professional, like always be a learner. As soon as you're a professional, you know it all and you stop learning and then you're there just as an advisor. But no matter how old I get or how experienced I get, I always want to be a beginner, a sponge, soaking, learning, listening. And I think if you do that, then you're always going to adapt to lead the people that you're leading in a way that's going to help them. I've studied a lot on leadership, and I love the different leadership styles of the different generations. So like the oldest generation on the planet right now is the silent generation, because when they were younger, they were seen but not heard. They were never encouraged to have a voice. And now their leadership style is described as controlling. And that can sound negative, but every leadership style is a product of the culture that they've grown up in. And they grew up in a time of war. And when you're at war, you need to control. It's command and control. You're not going to do a feedback survey when you're like, right, who wants to go to the front line to fight, right? It's like command and control, go. Yeah. So they were naturally controlling. And then after that, there was the baby boomers, because there was a big baby boom after the war. And they were more like directing, still like not as much as control and command, but like, this is the way, I'm giving you the instruction, like whether it's like I've heard or I know, but you go. And then after that was Gen X. And they're the parents of Gen Z, and they were coordinating. So they started working in a circle, working in a team. And because they're the parents of Gen Z, you see this come out in them because they love collaboration. So after Gen X was millennials, Gen Y, which is my generation, and we were guiding. So like a bigger brother and sister, we're just like kind of going, this is the way, but I'll go with you. I'm not just telling you what to do, like we'll do this together. And then Gen Z, their leadership style is empowering. So they want to like be a voice to the voiceless, shine light in the darkness, empower one another. And then Gen Alpha, which is the generation coming after Gen Z, born after 2010. So the oldest is 15 right now, because they've gone to the end of the English alphabet, X, Y, Z, and now they're on the Greek alphabet, so Alpha, Beta, Gamma. So Generation Alpha, their leadership style is seeming to be, they've said, inspiring. So they really want to lead just by inspirational like stories and realness and authenticity. It was McCrindle, a research group based in Australia, who kind of pointed all these kind of things out. So all that to say is that every generation has different leadership styles. And I think every generation has brought so much beauty into the church. And I think, one of the things I've learned is just never to judge a generation for the way they lead, but just to try and learn and love, and if we can get that intergenerational humility and conversation, the church can be such a great place together. Because outside of the church, you don't get that. You see the generations pointing fingers, what you do and don't like each other. But if the church could model what intergenerational leadership looks like, that could be really cool.
Yeah, you're leading towards my next question, which was around, just taking a step back, if you were to put the church on a mind map, what are some of the things that we can improve on? What are the things that, we can do better at? And so how do we be better leaders? Yeah. Anything else that comes to your mind in terms of, what we can do better for this generation that we're living in?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the church is, the bride and Jesus is the groom. And so if it was my wedding day and you came up to me and you said, Dan, your bride's really ugly. I'd be really upset about that. So when it comes to talking about the church, I find it a very sensitive subject, and I'm okay with it being sensitive because it's the bride of Christ. And I think it's important that whatever we say in terms of what could be better always comes out of a place of love, so that the church can be better rather than a place of critique and pulling down and tearing down, because the non-Christians of the world are seeing a lot of the church hurting each other at the moment. And so I think it's important that we can show the opposite of what it's meant to be, that we can love each other and encourage each other to be better. But yeah, I think the church could definitely do better at not comparing church with church. We live in a culture and society where it's normal to compare our followers, our views, our comments, compare our clothes, our popularity, compare our wealth and our schools and our education. We compare so much. So again, we are a product of the culture we grew up in. But it's sad when that creeps into the church and we compare our services and our styles and this and that, and it just becomes like a competition. Even now, there's loads of festivals, the church is putting on across the summer in the UK. And these are amazing, God-glorifying festivals. And then what would be really sad if all these festivals looked at each other's festivals and be like, oh, look how big that one is, or they got that one to speak, or oh, they're doing that. And if all the churches are in competition with each other, and I'm not saying they are, but I'm saying that's our normal flesh kind of just response. But if we don't want to conform to the patterns of this world, but allow God to transform us by the renewing of our mind, as it says in Romans 12, I think it'd be a beautiful thing if the church just really doubles down, impressing into God and encouraging one another, different denominations, different styles, and not being like, this is the way. Because God is doing something, he's pouring out his spirit. And if you look at church numbers and all the magazines and newspapers, they're talking about this quiet revival getting louder and louder. Yeah. What would be really bad if churches were like, this is where it's happening. Yeah. Look at us. Look how good we are. Where it's nothing to do with us. It's what God's doing with his presence. And there's this term called collective grandeur narcissism. It's where collectively you are narcissistic. What it means is collectively you feel like you are better than others. So if you're a church and you think you're better than that church on the corner, that is collective grandeur narcissism. And it's the absolute opposite to what Jesus ever wanted the church to be like. The local church, whether it's got 20 people or 200 people or 2,000 people, is the local church. And if we can encourage each other and see each other as equal and support each other rather than we're better, then, I think that would be a healthier place for the church.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think that's a fantastic, fundamental opportunity for us to be a collective and collaborate better and sort of support each other. Just spot on what you're saying, Dan. I really want to now talk about, which is, we talk about the church. We know, Dan Blythe as someone who's been on TV and a lot of sermons, and especially the youth. We're now seeing in this day and age, this generation, the Gen Zs, the millennials as well, and as you've described it, they're probably the fastest now coming into the faith, and especially across the UK and certainly across various other jurisdictions. Why do you think that's happening? What's happening in this spiritual climate that's causing just a big momentum and a big shift? And we talk about revival, so I'd like to understand, what does revival mean to you? Yeah. As well as what's happening in this current climate with the youth and Gen Zs?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Joel. I think, first of all, if we talk about what's happening culturally, spiritually, Gen Z are kind of seeking. And so it's not just Christianity. They are massively into crystals, a lot of them. Even witches and witchcraft. There's, witch talk is like TikTok, but for witches. Massive growth in the spiritual realm. And then there's massive growth in Christianity. I think what's happening is people are searching spiritually, and then if they encounter something which is true, then they're actually resonating with it. And that's what's happening when they come into church. They're coming into church, almost not post-Christian, but pre-Christian. Some of them really have no idea. Some of them are having dreams about Jesus, or just crazy stuff. And they're walking into church and they're hearing the truth. And it's the truth which is setting them free. It's the truth that they're resonating with. And then they're also just meeting people who are great role models. In a time when the world is full of influencers only change your outside. Wear your hair like this, wear your makeup like this, wear your clothes like this. But they're actually looking for role models that help you with your heart, your character, your values and your principles. And so I'm seeing Gen Z just go to church because they're spiritually seeking, but they're encountering the truth, which is really setting them free. And then they're surrounded by role models, people who are going to encourage them and empower them, which is their leadership style. It's a great time, for the church. So it's no surprise to me that Gen Z are really encountering Jesus at this time. But when it comes to the word revival, some people would say maybe it's not so much a revival, maybe it's like a renewal. God is just renewing, what he has done, or, what he is doing. I've been in youth ministry 20 years and it's definitely different now. Like I was just at a youth festival this weekend. I was just with a load of teenagers just this morning talking about revival. And what I'm seeing is, yeah, sure, attendance is peaking, but it's more about God's presence. Like God's presence is falling. And I think it's because of their hunger, like their passion, their desperation. Like I'm seeing young people on their knees crying out to God for their schools, for their friends and their family. And God is like, he doesn't want to be a distant dad, right? You know, when you cry out to God with that desperation and hunger, he's not like, oh, I'm going to hang back for a bit. James 4 verses 8 says, as you draw near to him, he will draw near to you. And so I'm seeing this hunger from the young people. So God is just pouring out his presence and they're just experiencing him in such a way that they leave and tell other people. And that's what you saw in the Welsh revival in 1903. It started with a girl called Florence Evans. The youth leader said, who wants to share something? And she gets up and she says, I just want to let you all know that I love Jesus with my whole heart. The moment she says that, the presence of God falls, they all start just praying and weeping for the lost. They all go out, people come in. They go out, people come in. They all go out. It ended with 100,000 people giving their life to Christ. Pubs shut down because alcoholics were set free. Marriages were restored. And mining was the main job back then, which was like known as one of the most like depressive jobs there was. There were stories of them smiling and singing, going down to the mine because they knew no longer were they living for a career. They had a calling and it was about people, so they had purpose. And so, you know, that's what a revival does. It doesn't stay in a tent or in a room or in a building. Like it flows out and it shapes society and it changes the nation. And so if we're on the cusp of that, which I think we could be, I think it's really exciting.
Yeah. And so just on that note as well, we're talking about this influx of so many people coming in and getting to know the faith, you know, especially for someone like your work then as well as with youth and, you know, being involved at Alpha. Can you just talk about how, you know, this ushering of, you know, new generation coming in, influx, you know, how is that having an impact on your work? And also, where do you see this going in the next sort of months, weeks, years to come? You know, what's the direction that you're sensing both spiritually and also from an outward perspective?
Yeah. So, you know, the Alpha Youth series that, you know, we've just kind of released was the third edition, the third innovation. The first one came out in 2017. And since then, 3 million people did that one. So we wanted to steward what God's given us to steward. It's not about Alpha. If God says, I'm not using Alpha anymore, we'll be the first to throw it aside. It's just a tool. But we wanted to make sure we're a good steward of it. That's why we created the new series.
Right.
And then that came out in November. And since then, 400,000 teenagers across 71 countries have done it so far. But the thing that like excites me is not so much that big number, even though it is incredible. It's like the stories of the ones and the twos. Like a lad called Jasper, 17 years old, ran it in his school, invited 100 non-Christian mates. 61 of them gave their life to Christ, but he chose to run it in his schools. And normally our model was we run it for the churches to run with their youth group, the youth leader to run it with their youth group. We never really had schools as like the mission field. It was more like for youth groups to invite their non-Christian mates. But this season, like now with Gen Z, they all want to run it themselves in their schools. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of young people, and they're not saying, I'm going to wait till I'm like 21 to be an evangelist. Like, I'm going to evangelize now. I'm going to go, I'm going to share. So they've been labeled the anxious generation. And that is true. They do struggle and suffer from anxiety and on heightened levels than previous generations. But yet they're encountering God. And I'm seeing like they are bolder and braver and more courageous than other generations in terms of evangelizing and living out that Great Commission in Matthew 28 verses 18. So how crazy is it that this anxious generation full of the Holy Spirit seems to be one of the most courageous generations?
So good. I'm going to switch gears for a second now and I really want to talk about family. And I think that's really important to you as well. And I know how family is amazing. You've got your boys here as well. And so blessed to see them. Balancing ministry with family, you know, it's a hot topic. How do you do that? You know, can you share some light on sort of, you know, balancing the two? Ministry can get really busy. Family's important.
Yeah.
Can you share some insights on how do you balance the two? And also just any advice and guidance as well that comes behind that? Yeah.
I heard a quote that says, balance is the luxury of the comfortable. And so I think if you always live in your comfort zone, you can have balance every single day. But if you're going to take risks, then sometimes you might not always have the balance that you want. So I really believe in balance and health. And my number one thing is my relationship with God. Like if I don't get that right, and when I say right, what I mean is if I don't spend time with God, I just fall apart. So my prayer time, my time in the Word, my time in worship with God is essential. That's my number one priority. And then it's my marriage, because if I don't really prioritize my marriage and have health there, I can't be a good dad, and we can't lead together. And so, there's always a big discussion in the parenting world, like, how can you put your marriage before your kids? But I mean, you can do whatever you want to do. But for me, I have to prioritize my wife, because if I don't have that healthy relationship with her, we're not going to be able to be good parents. And then my kids come, would be that third priority thing, and if there is an order, because out of my relationship with God and my relationship with my wife is the overflow where I get to hopefully be a good dad. And don't get me wrong, I get it wrong a lot. But I love being a parent, and I love being a dad, and I love learning how to be a better dad. And then everything else kind of flows, but that's the order, if that makes sense. So like my career and what I'm doing with Alpha ministry is the fourth most important thing out of all of that. And if that gets more of my time than everything else falls apart. And so sometimes I say like spinning plates. And so I know which plates I have to keep spinning, and I know which plates can stop. I'd like to keep them all spinning, but if you can't keep some spinning, I'm keeping these ones first and then these ones second. So I love writing, and I've got stuff in my heart that I like to write, but right now just not got capacity. So I'd rather keep health here and say no to that. Me and my wife started a parenting podcast called Young Cubs, just because we've struggled so much, and so much online is like, this is how you should do it. And like parent guilt is a real thing. And so we wanted to create a space where hopefully parents won't have guilt. And it's okay, we all make mistakes, but let's just keep growing together. But again, as much as we love doing that Young Cubs podcast, that's out of the overflow of health. And as soon as the health of these important things like my marriage and my kids, if that starts like red flags, then we're not gonna do that. So all that to say, when it comes to balance, I think you really need to know what your priorities are. And then once you've got your priorities, you've got to stick to them and set boundaries for your priorities.
Yeah. What does frustration look like for you, and how does your faith then support that? Because we're humans, we're going to have some days where it's good days, get some bad days. It's natural. Yeah. But we hang on to the faith, which is important. But for someone like yourself, where you're involved, you're busy, family's important. So there are going to be days when, you got those bad days and frustrating days. So talk to me, how do you navigate that? And sort of what do you do? Do you have some framework? Do you have a process? Do you have a sort of a checklist that you got to go through?
Yeah, I should have. I think that's a really good challenge. I wouldn't say I have got something in place for when I am frustrated. I think I am surrounded by people who tell me the truth when I need to hear the truth, especially my wife. If she's like saying, Dan, you're just being rude. Dan, you're out of line. I've got mates that, we do this thing called Wednesday Waffle, where every Wednesday we'll just do a minute voice note to each other, like how we doing, where we struggling, all that kind of stuff. So, I wouldn't say I've got a process if like things go bad and I'm frustrated, but I have got people around me who will just kind of help me, in those moments. And I think when it comes to people who will tell you the truth, when you're having a conversation with someone and you might have some green in their mouth, like, a lot of the time, like if I just met you today and say when you greeted me and we met for the first time, if you had something in your mouth, I probably wouldn't have said it, because I haven't got a relationship with you, and I probably would have just left it, and just cracked on. But, if we had that relationship, I would have gone, oh, Joel, just, you just got a bit of lettuce there, because I know that we've got that relationship where you can say that level of truth. And so I think it's always good to invite those people into your world, because they don't happen by chance. You need to be intentional with those relationships, and you need to say, hey, help me with my blind spots. And when you see stuff that I can't see, please tell me the truth, because I just don't want to get down the line where I'm just like living my life leading, but I've just got massive blind spots that everybody can see, but I can't see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's so encouraging to hear. Thank you for being open about that. And I think you're also tipping into the conversation around the podcast. I know it's a bit different being on the other side of the fence here. Talk to me sort of about the podcast with your wife. What's been the response like? How have you been seeing it coming to fruition? Was it again birthed out of that sort of, hey, look, we're seeing a lot of things online, let's do something about that? Because you're an innovator, it comes across, which is you're a relationship builder, and you really want to impact society in a very new, fresh way. And I think having tools like that, and obviously having people to listen to that, it's also, fantastic. So could you lift the lid on sort of, what's that journey been like? How's it been coming to fruition? What's the response been like? And what do you want to go with that? What's your direction? What's your target for that?
Yeah. So I think I've never been an entrepreneur. I've always been, let me start again. I've never been an entrepreneur. I've always been an intrapreneur. So an intrapreneur is someone who's entrepreneurial within an organization. I think anything I've ever kind of created, it's always been, for the organization or within the organization that I've worked for. Same with my wife. She works for an anti-human trafficking organization called A21. And so everything she's created has always been within an organization. And it's been great. But when you do it within an organization, it's kind of safe, because it's not your money and it's not your time. And if it fails, there's certain things in place. And then we were just talking about wanting to create something together, like actually, build something together. And they say, if you want a healthy marriage, look for things that you can actually do together or create together. So some people might just go and do a hobby, and we just thought we'll just start a podcast. But it wasn't a podcast for the podcast's sake. We really wanted to help kind of really focusing on millennial parents, raising those Gen Alpha kids. Like, it is for everyone, but that kind of like generational parents are spending more time with their kids. So statistics say, but they're also like, getting a video a day on TikTok saying, do this and do that, put your car chair facing this way and that way. And everyone's like, gosh, this is too much. So we just thought if we could just help a few parents, and we didn't mind whether it went viral. We didn't mind if it got like #1 podcast or it flopped. What we did say, we did want it to help at least 100 parents. So if it helps, put an episode out and there's at least 100 downloads, whether it's on YouTube or audio, and we've helped 100, just encourage them, just keep going. You're doing way better than you think you are. Then it was worth it. And, luckily, like every episode we've released, it's had over 100, which means like there's been parents that it has helped. And we've had kind of DMs and messages just saying, thank you for just, creating a space where it's okay to fail, but we get up and we go again and we keep trying. And so I think, we'll keep creating. Like it costs us our own money. We actually were saving a little house deposit, and we actually used some of that. And that's because we just felt God just put this on our heart, and we didn't want to get to the end of our life, with a house, but then not being obedient to what God had put on our heart. Yeah. So we dived into our own savings for it, but we don't regret it, because I think, getting to the end of your life, you'll always be happy that you made a decision which helped others, which I know you're doing. And just hearing the way you're operating with this podcast and the way you're working and you're just using this margin to like serve others, I think is incredible. And so I'd love to learn more about, why you do that and how you do that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Maybe I'll come on your
way. Yeah, we'd love that.
Thank you. I think it's been so amazing just to kind of talk about faith, and this is really about an opportunity for people to just get to know you and sort of the insights that because you're so well known from my view, from the Christian community, and talking to a lot of people and done some incredible work. What have been some of the highlights of some of your time in the faith? Whether it's from Australia, whether it's from the UK, or anywhere you've gone abroad. Can you think of just one standout sort of use case or an example where you've seen something really transformative and you've had a small part of it because of the Lord's blessing on that? Has it been an encounter basically where you've come across where, as an example to share, just where God has moved in that person's life, or just an example? Yeah.
I think when you see a young person who is now like not a teenager, but the fact that you kind of like disciple them or encourage them or mentor them, and then now they're walking with God and they're doing the same for other people. I think that's the biggest thing for me. And I could name like at least a handful of teenagers, and it's not thousands. It is like a handful of teenagers, which I personally kind of like really discipled. Like whenever I've been a youth leader, you'd always put people in discipleship groups. So in terms of the actual young people that I said I was discipling them myself, like walking that journey with them, it wasn't like hundreds and hundreds, like it's like handfuls. Yeah. But when you see some of those now just discipling other people like that to me, it's in the private place. No one knows about it, but you can just see their life walking with Jesus, and they're helping other people walk with Jesus. To me, it doesn't really get much better than that. Yeah.
What does Jesus mean to you?
Jesus would be my everything. And I know that sounds so cliche, but like I could not do life without him. Like in terms of, I don't know how people do life without him. Like, I've always struggled with fear. I've always had the fear of public speaking. And so it's weird that I'm doing what I'm doing, because I'm always, at some level speaking to people, in front of people. Yeah. And I'd love to say that God has just healed me of fear and I don't fear anymore, but I do. Like I still struggle with it. But every time Jesus like meets me in this like intimate place where, his presence is like nothing you can really describe. And so I say he's my everything, But by that I mean he is my rock, he's my shield, he's my sword, he's my compass, he's my guide, he's my anchor.
Yeah. We get asked this topic about fear a lot, and anxiety is always a big topic on the podcast here with various other guests. And my obviously question always back to that is, if someone's listening right now is going through fear, anxiety, and just going through a confusion place in their mind, how would you kind of approach that for someone who needs to navigate that fear and overcome them through the faith? So what's that from your perspective to kind of encourage someone?
Yeah. I think first of all, it's important to know that God's not angry with your fear. He's not disappointed in the fact that you're struggling with anxiety and worry. It is a normal emotion. And that's why you see God all the way through scripture saying, fear not, be strong and courageous. I'm always with you. Do not be troubled. He's saying that because he knows it's a normal, human, fleshly feeling. But all the way through, he does want to help. So I'd say, for someone who's listening and they're struggling, I'd say, first of all, don't beat yourself up. Be okay with the fact that it's a normal feeling, but then also know that God's plan for your life and desire for your life isn't that you live with it forever. He does want you to kind of fear less, which is a journey. And so the world will say use exposure therapy. If you're scared of something, just expose yourself to it more and more. If you're scared of dogs, just keep exposing yourself to a dog more and more, step by step, and then hopefully you'll overcome it. I think exposure therapy is good, but I would say try exposure therapy to God's presence. And again, cliche, but he is love. And he's not just any love, he's perfect love. And 1 John 4 verse 18 says, perfect love casts out all fear. And so for me in my journey, where I've been facing fear for the last 20 years, ever since God called me into kind of public ministry, it's in his presence where the fear diminishes and the courage grows.
So good.
And so however much you fear, however much anxiety you've got, just keep pressing into his presence, do communion with God every single day, put him first, and just watch as you allow that foundation to erode, fear over time. Wow.
Yeah. Because you'll be surprised how much Christians and non-Christians struggle with fear, and you hit it home so nicely about, the Lord talks about fear not, because it's a number one killer, both in your faith, both in, your walk of life. And so for me, which is overcoming fear and people sharing their experiences and how they navigate and deal with that is extremely important. So I think on that note, which is I've got one more question, and we're going to go into this time of quick fire questions, which we do with every guest on our show. But my last question, I'd say to you, which is, what is the next move that you think in the coming weeks ahead? What's on the agenda of yourself? Is it a case of continuing to be this person, to working with the youth? What's next? The next chapter for you? Yeah,
I love that question. Like I said, I'm turning 40, and 40 is such a standout number biblically. So I'm definitely in a place where I'm like, God, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, I'm in. I know that next season, whatever it will look like, will definitely be real present dad, real present husband, real close friend, hopefully, to the people that I'm around. But what I do want to do is just make sure I've got imposter syndrome, wherever I go. So like I said, I want that space to be, I'm not confident in my own skills and abilities, but I'm really believing that God's going to do something in and through me for someone else's benefit and for God's glory. And so, I love Alpha, so I can see myself working for Alpha for the rest of my life. I've been so blessed working with Alpha, but within Alpha, I tell Miles, our CEO, I'm like, look, whatever you need me to do, as long as I'm in a space where I know Dan's skills and abilities and talents aren't going to do it, it's got to be by the power of the Holy Spirit, then I'm in.
Amen. And I said one last thing, which is if someone's listening right now and never heard of Jesus before, and never come, and I feel led to kind of ask you this because I feel really that there's an atmosphere that's brewing with the Holy Spirit, but if someone has never encountered the word Jesus or known Jesus before, what's the 60-second sermon to kind of just talk about Jesus and sort of bring in someone to know about Jesus?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say like Jesus is a friend who knows you. He does know you, and he's also been through whatever you're going through. Sometimes, we think Jesus, he is God, and then God is like this distant, dormant, faraway person that you can't relate to. But Jesus came from heaven to earth, and everything we go through mentally, physically, emotionally, he has been through. He came from heaven to earth, invited everybody, showed us the way, went through what we went through to show us the way, and then he went to the cross so that we wouldn't have to go through that alone so that we could have a relationship with the Heavenly Father. So yeah, I mean, Jesus is the closest friend you could ever have. He's the strongest leader that you could ever be led by. And he's the shepherd who will lead you for the rest of your life. And if you ever go wandering, struggling, and you've kind of messed up, he's the shepherd who will leave the 99 to come after the one, in terms of he will never turn his back on you, even though you might turn your back on him. He will never stop loving you, no matter what happens in your life.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that and being led. Dan, it's been honestly a fantastic episode. If you're okay, I would love to go into the 7 quickfire rapid questions.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah.
This is literally, the word 7 comes from the word completion. We're coming to that completion set. And so 7 quick questions, all about you. And you're ready, let me know. We'll go for it.
Let's go.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
Most used emoji?
It is, at the moment, is it this? Well, it's like celebration, praise hands. I don't know what you even call it, but it's like, yeah, well done, let's go.
Favorite takeaway?
Oh, yes. Wingstop. Have you heard of Wingstop?
Yes.
Yeah, amazing.
I didn't think you were a Wingstop guy.
I mean, on my cheat day, like one day a week, I have a cheat day, and Wingstop is my go-to.
Which particular flavour?
Mate, my spice level is like, the height of it is garlic bread, so I'm terrible. So it's normally like just lemon and herb, or like some like mild one.
One thing nobody knows about you?
One thing nobody knows about me. That's a great question. Because like my wife knows absolutely everything about me. But your listeners obviously don't know anything about me. So maybe one thing that all the listeners wouldn't know about me is that my favorite movie is Gladiator.
Yeah.
Never told that to anyone.
Nice. Which Bible character do you relate the most with?
I want to relate most to Daniel, because he's just that man of prayer and he never makes mistakes. But I'm probably more like Moses, trying to be obedient to lead, but like questioning God's decision the whole time.
Yeah. And how do you unwind after a very hard day?
I have a Wingstop. Like if it's my one cheat day, yeah, have a Wingstop with my wife, and then we'll watch a movie or some Netflix together.
All right. This last question is literally something that I've observed, but I'm sure you'll come relate with this. You're known for a number of hairstyles. Right. What's been the one hairstyle that you still would love to go back with, or you're going to keep with? What's been the favorite hairstyle for yourself over the time?
Yeah, wow, okay. I mean, the thing is, I grew up and David Beckham was like my like role model. So I had all of his haircuts, including the braids. That was the worst season of my whole life. So, but the best season, best hairstyle that I've had, I mean, probably just like the short back and sides. It's just easy. You get up and you just go, no fuss.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I saw one time where you had the mullet, I was thinking behind it, you kind of announced it, said this is going to go now.
Yes, and my wife did not allow the mullet to stay for long at all.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for being here, being with me, blessing us with your presence here, and just sharing honest insights, guidance as well. I'm certainly really, excited for you as well in terms of the journey where God's taken you. I think you're an incredible human being. I'm just getting to know you. And I really believe that you've blessed me personally as well as part of the insights you've shared today, and sort of just your being open and transparent in your faith.
Thanks,
which is so needed in this generation. I pray that someone's listening here that's been really captured by your story, and I'm sure at some point we will get together again.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I've done a couple of podcasts since we've launched Alpha Youth, which has been such an honor and a privilege. But I think the space that you've got here is a real safe space where, like, I feel like you can speak, and it's just like being open and honest is good, and it's not always like that. And so you're a pastoral host, which is, I think we need more podcasts which have pastoral leaders leading them. So thank you.
Thank you so much again. I really appreciate that. Dan, God bless you and take care.
Thanks.